guys, welcome back to the Discipline Life Podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Aria, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
If you're listening to us on YouTube, if you don't mind going ahead and giving this video a thumbs up, it really helps out the channel. And if you're not already, please do consider subscribing and ring the notification bell to be notified when we upload new content. If you want to get the podcast early and get bonus content, please do consider joining us on Patreon. The link to that is down below in the description box, as well as our email if you want to reach out that way. On today's episode, we are going to continue talking about the pillars of a successful domestic discipline relationship. The focus of today's episode is the topic of consistency within your domestic discipline.
Sorry, she looked straight at me. We were saying that because this is an area I need improvement in. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I would definitely say that this is an area that we are still kind of on that journey to improve in our own relationship.
Is it a pillar that's up and crumbling and we have to fix it, or we're still putting it up?
I don't know.
To complete the building. I was trying to think.
I think consistency is something that we have always struggled with in our relationship. And so we thought we would talk about that because it really is something that can make or break your dynamic.
It's true. It's very true.
And I think it's important to point out that consistency is a skill.
Yes. And in my case, excuse me, it's a learned skill.
Absolutely. And so as a skill, it's something that can be developed and improved. It's not something that's finite and, unchangeable.
Unchangeable, right.
It's definitely something that you can develop and improve upon. So that's something that we're still doing. So please know that we are having this conversation just as much for ourselves as we are for all of you.
I mean, that's always the case. As we've always said, we're not experts, but this is definitely a field that when she was like, this is what we're going to talk about. And I went, oh, is that because we're struggling in this area? And when I say we, I think I mean me.
Well, this topic really is going to be like the burden of responsibility for consistency really does lie disproportionately on the husband or the dominant person in the relationship.
Yep.
Now, don't think that the women or the submissive partners get off easy. We will have a pillar in a future episode that the burden of responsibility will fall disproportionately on them. It just so happens that this topic, it does fall more on the husband's side to maintain that consistency.
I guess probably what everybody's asking is, and so I'll just start here unless you tell me, no, we need to go someplace else. But one of the reasons we're struggling with consistency, or I'm struggling with consistency, is I find it's hard to keep your partner consistent when you yourself are not being consistent. And so what I mean by that is one of the hardest areas where we're having consistency is my lovely wife is a night owl, and so it is hard for her to come to bed at a early time. I should say an earlier time than most folks, and
well, than myself, because
than yourself, I mean.
I was like,
most folks they would say, "Wow, that's late," but for her, it's early,
right?
And I understand that a little bit because sometimes it's the only time of the day where she has time to herself. Even though I really try to strive sometime during the week to take my daughter somewhere so that she can be by herself, that is hard, and so. And for me, I'm trying to form better habits of getting up in the morning. You know, during the spring and summer, as many of you know, especially if you live, depending on where you live, it gets warm really quickly. And I need to walk our dog in the morning. And I don't want it to be too hot, especially because usually I need to walk her and then go straight to work. So I don't have time necessarily to get all hot and sweaty and take a shower and all those kind of things. So I'm trying to wake up earlier so I can walk the dog earlier. I haven't done that well. Therefore, because I'm not doing it well, one of my issues is, and Arya, feel free to jump in when you hear what I'm about to say. I think you know where I'm headed. Is because I'm having a hard time with consistency. It's hard for me to hold her accountable to her consistency because I do suffer from, well, it's not fair if I'm X, Y, and Z. And what we've talked about several times is just because you may be struggling as the dominant in a consistency area doesn't mean that you should let her go by the wayside, the habits that she's trying to form, because you maybe feel a little guilty or whatever. So that's where I'm going to start. You got something to say on that?
I was going to say, you say it's not fair, but really in a power differential relationship, do things have to be fair?
Well, no, and see, you're absolutely right. This is the part that we can talk about that maybe many of you are having to redefine in your relationship, because we live in a world. I'm going to try to keep this not in politics or anything else.
And we are based in the Western world. We're based in America, so
right.
We are taking typical American
Western culture, right?
Western culture.
Yeah. We live in a world where there's a lot of talk about fairness, right? And even growing up, at least my folks did, I'd say, well, that's not fair. And they'd go, well, life's not fair. Well, to a certain extent, they are correct. Maybe not to a certain extent, they're absolutely correct. Life is not fair. If it was, then we'd have a lot more things that are truly, purely just happen. But we know that doesn't necessarily happen. So one of the things I'm having to retrain myself is because we live in a world where everybody thinks it should be fair and it's not. And when you really think about it, there are some things that no, if it was truly fair, we probably wouldn't really like that either. And so what I've had to reserve myself to is, okay, my job is not necessarily to be fair, but to do right by my partner. And she has asked for, it's not like she hasn't asked for this. She has asked for my help to help her be more consistent in this particular area of bedtime.
Now, that doesn't mean that as the husband, you should strive to point out that unfairness or...
No, correct, right. And you should still strive to be fair.
Right, and so, you shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to hold her account. Like, you should still strive to your own personal betterment.
That's true. Yes, absolutely.
But even if you are like, hey, I got into bed kind of late, so, that threw her timing off, that doesn't matter to an extent.
Right.
To go back to the situation we're talking about, or... if you're like, oh, I worked from home today, so she wasn't as productive, to an extent, that shouldn't matter. Like,
right.
If she has her list of things that need to get done, she's responsible for what you're doing in your situations, to an extent, don't matter. Unless something extenuating comes up, like, perhaps one of the children falls and breaks a bone and she has to take them to the emergency room. Obviously, that's going to take precedence. That's going to be more important. And that is, something that shouldn't come up a whole lot. So you can make an exception when it does.
Right.
But for the most part, there should be a expectation that the rules are set, and if they're broken, there will be consequences. Because I know for myself, I am really, really good at pleading my case and trying to...
Sorry, I'm laughing because we're having a little eye contact here, and she knows exactly, but she's right.
And so I'm really good at pleading my case. I'm really good at... defending why I didn't exactly do the rules to their, expectation. And there are always legitimate reasons.
Sure.
But that doesn't, because I don't set out to break the rules. I don't
I
set
hope
out,
not. No.
and I don't set out to disregard Coda's authority. And so when I do, it's because I've convinced myself through a legitimate reason why that was okay.
Right.
And his job is to come in and say, no, that's not okay. Really ever,
Right.
but with few exceptions in all reality.
And again, I want to point out this is another area too. We've talked about this before, but one of the things that I struggle with consistency, one of the reasons I struggle with it, and I'm getting better in this area, but it's hard because Arya will tell you I've had times where I'm going from 0 to I either have 0 or 60, and I'm learning to keep it in the middle. And what I mean by that is either be real lax or really, really strict. And so one of the things that you can do, one of the things I need to do, and what you need to do with consistency is just because a rule is broken doesn't mean that you're mean about it, but you come to your wife and you say, you did break that rule. I know you have your reasons, but you broke that rule, and so there is going to be punishment. You don't have to be, how dare you break that rule? You knew better. Don't try to give me your excuses. Or, oh, well, it's okay. This is where I tend to default, unfortunately. I didn't do X, Y, and Z, so I probably need to do better. No, you need to find that healthy medium so that you can be consistent. And what I'm finding is and let me know if I'm jumping too far ahead, Arya, but what I'm finding is that because she's asked for me to do these things, if I don't do them, I actually set her up for failure. And what I've seen, and which is the reason, this is the ultimate reason why I'm trying to get better with consistency. Yes, so she can form good habits, but number two, I see when she doesn't reach those goals, it takes a toll on her. She feels like she's failed. She feels like she didn't accomplish some of the things she wanted to. And I don't want her to feel that way, because we all love it when we accomplish a goal. And I want her to succeed, and therefore I realize, no, I do need to be more consistent even in the moment if she doesn't like it. I need to do that so that at the end of the week or the end of the month or whatever she does, thank you, I achieved my goal and I feel good.
I think that that's a really good illustration to my first point of why consistency is important, because it creates security.
There you go. That's the word I was searching for. Thank you. I knew she would get that word
It creates
out for me.
security within
you
your
go.
relationship, and it creates security within the wife or the submissive partner. It creates a sense of security knowing that you're being held accountable.
Right.
And the only way you get accountability is with consistency.
Right. And so yeah, and so that's what I kind of came I'm a little bit of a slow learner sometimes, okay? And what I mean by that is sometimes a rock has to, hit me on top of the head before I go, "Oh, I get it." But I really saw that this week is that I realized, you know what, for me not being consistent, I'm not doing my wife any favors like I think I am. I'm actually I'm making it worse for her. So I've got to, regardless of how I feel about it, regardless of whatever the justification is, say, I understand. However, you still have the ability to do X. So,
And maybe if there are extenuating circumstances that are legitimate, maybe don't come down with the most severe punishment right away. For us,
right.
You
Maybe
know-
it's a tier, right?
right. And so maybe if I'm like, oh, I forgot to make your lunch, and so I decided to stay up 15 extra minutes and make your lunch before I came to bed. Well, that's poor time management on my part, and we've talked about that as well.
Right.
But
Because I've made an exception in that in the past, right?
So maybe that is the consequence for that is writing lines or an early bedtime the next night.
Or packing 2 lunches. No.
Or if I'm like, hey, our daughter woke up and she needed something, so I ended up coming to bed 10 minutes late. Maybe there can be an exception there, or maybe it's still like, okay, well, you need to write lines. or something like that, where it's like, okay, that's a good reason.
But
Or
in order to keep it consistent.
or probe a little bit, because there's
Yeah.
been times where our daughter wakes up and she needs something, so I get her something and then I take an extra 10 minutes before coming to
Right,
bed.
before
And
coming
so
to bed.
probe a little bit to get those to get all the information before making a decision. But if that happens time and time again, then it ends up being a more serious consequence,
It does.
because
Right.
it's like, okay, that was a good reason, but this is like the second time it's happened within the week, or maybe it's the third time, and you're like, we're going to have a severe consequence, because this is becoming a pattern of behavior that needs to be broken.
Right. Right. And I think that you hit the nail on the head right there, is that probe a little bit, but then based on that, you don't have to go to tier 3. You know, some of these things that we have in our rules, they eventually could end up at a higher tier, but that's not where they start.
And just a side note, he is referring to our punishment tier system, which you can find a detailed explanation on the Patreon about our punishment tiers, as well as the pictures of what those tiers are. Or you can go to our Instagram account for the podcast, and there is a highlight reel where I put the pictures of our tier system in the stories there.
And you're on top of that. She does all her social media because she's a lot better at it than I am. And so, you know, as I'm talking, think of this episode, as she was saying, as this is almost kind of therapeutic for me. I'm getting to talk out and talking to myself as I'm talking to you guys of things that I need to start doing. And so, yeah, that first thing is be consistent, and it needs to be very rare, even if it sounds like it's a good excuse. Make that be very, very rare that you go, okay, I'm going to let you skip it, because, again, we're trying to form those habits. Now, we're not trying to go for perfection here, but, again, you got to weigh that maybe 9 times out of 10, maybe that excuse.
Now, for our situation of like just talking about bedtime, since that's
Yeah.
kind of the situation that you've brought up, you know, if your wife has a infant, then you
Right.
can't necessarily expect her to get, you know, consistent, adequate sleep
Right.
if she's like, hey, that really depends on when the baby wakes up.
Right.
Or if, you know, even in our situation right now, if our daughter was ill and I
Right.
needed to stay up with her to make sure that
Which
she...
has happened before. Yep.
Yeah, it's rare, but those would be extenuating circumstances where you make an exception.
Right. Right.
But for the most part, those things don't happen very often.
No. And so that's the first part of where you need to get better in consistency, is even if the excuse sounds like, oh yeah, don't let it slide. Don't let it slide. And like I said, I'm pointing 2 fingers back at myself here.
And so the second point that I wanted to bring up, that why consistency is important, is that it creates a sense of predictability within the relationship.
Wait, you like predictability? No, I'm just kidding. She doesn't like
Yes.
surprises like in any way. So, but yes, here, do you want to?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you know, the reason why you want to be predictable is that you want to give your wife, and it comes back to security, but you really want to give her the ability to understand and predict the consequences of her behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is the only way that you're going to be able to shift, modify, and change behavior patterns and habits.
Yes.
Because, for instance, we have a dog, and she is a very stubborn breed. She's a pit bull boxer mix.
We
And
love her though.
she's a sweetheart, but she is stubborn. But she hates loud noises. And we have a baby gate that we, if we need to, you know, leave the house, we don't want her in the kitchen because she'll try to get in the garbage. So we put up a baby gate so she can't get into the kitchen when we're gone. And we have noticed that because the baby gate has fallen and it makes a really loud noise when it falls, she does not like that noise at all. So she won't go near it.
Yeah, right.
And so even if the baby gate is propped up against the wall and her toy gets like flung over near it, she will not go near it because she knows that every single time that baby gate falls, and if she knocks it over, it's going to make a really loud noise that she really hates.
Yeah,
And that's without fail.
that's true. That's without fail.
Like if you knock that baby gate over, it's going to make the loud noise. Because in all reality, it's just one of those hinge baby gates. In all reality, if she wanted to, she could jump over it.
No, she could. Yeah, she could.
If she really wanted to.
We've seen her jump. Yeah, yeah.
And if she really wanted to, she could knock it out of the doorway and get into the kitchen if she wanted. But she hates that noise so much. And that noise consistently happens every time. And she has learned, she has learned that she does not even go near it. She does not even push that boundary because she does not want that noise. In the same way, if as a wife, like for the example we're using, if I'm like, okay, I came to bed 10 minutes late and I got a spanking and it was awful. And then the next time, I came to bed 10 minutes late and he just kind of let it slide. And then the next time I came to bed 10 minutes late and he maybe had me write some lines. And then the next time he let it slide. And then the next time it was no big deal. And then the next time I didn't even bother telling him. And then the next time I get a spanking again. There's no predictability. Right. There's no sense of understanding where that boundary really is because the consistency is lacking. And I'm not motivated to actually change the behavior long term. Now, should I change that behavior because I have an intrinsic desire to change it? Yes, but let's get real. No. Sometimes you need, and that's why we have this relationship, is because sometimes you need that external motivation to do the things that you know you're supposed to do. In the same way that how many people would drive the speed limit if there wasn't the chance that they could get pulled over?
Right. That's true.
Because even though you should drive the speed limit to be safe and to operate your vehicle with control.
And avoid traffic jams, because they've actually proven if everybody did that, traffic jams wouldn't be nearly as bad. Sorry, I'm getting on the soapbox.
But how many people, like, if they did not have the external motivation of avoiding that ticket, avoiding the consequence, they would drive faster.
Unless you live in a state unlike ours that doesn't enforce that as much. But that's exactly to your point.
It's to my point that sometimes we need that external motivation of a consequence to make decisions that are to our best interest anyway.
Right. And this is another area where guys listening, the dominants listening, like it's an area where I've struggled because, again, I don't know. I will tell you there's a look sometimes that I get from Arya that just makes me melt a little bit, and she knows exactly what that is. But I have to be more consistent with saying no, and again holding her to that. I love that analogy that you just used about the ticket, because to a certain extent, it's like if you obey the law, you never have to fear the police. But if you break the law, then you're probably going to fear the police. So. And it's a healthy fear. I mean, yes, there are always exceptions of there are people and policemen, not all, who abuse their power, but for the most part, the policemen that we have all met are good people. They're working hard. They're trying to keep everybody safe. They don't necessarily want to write the ticket. They don't necessarily want to do that, but their job is to do that. And so I think that's a great analogy, because that's exactly where we have to stand as the dominant partners to say, look, we don't necessarily want to dish out the punishment. We don't necessarily want to give you that. But in order to help you stay consistent, we have to be like that policeman, and we have to pull that person over for speeding and say, I'm sorry, but you earned a ticket. And maybe you do a warning the first time, then maybe you give the ticket, right? Again, that's part of that tier system. But again, you're exactly right. You have to let them know, no, if you're speeding, the police are coming after you.
And you have to decide within your relationship what warrants a warning and what warrants a
Right, and that's going to be different for every
consequence, yeah.
relationship and different for every situation. You know, I brought up bedtime, but we have some other things. She has to drink a certain amount of water and these kind of things. And the punishments are different for each one of those rules.
All I was going to add to that was I think one of the reasons you struggle, and maybe other men struggle as well, is we've been brought up in a society where we believe in order to love someone, you have to make them happy.
That's so true. That is such a good point.
In order to love someone, you need to be very kind and giving to them.
And they need to be happy all the time. Everything should be wine and roses, right?
And when you've been married as long as we have, you realize that there's ebbs and flows. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries, even when it doesn't feel good at the moment.
Yeah.
And so when I look at you and I'm like, but Daddy, I'm not happy right now. That does melt you because you love me and you want me to be happy and you want all the good things for me. But sometimes in order to accomplish that, you have to set those boundaries and work through
through.
Right. And work through the uncomfortable moments in order to get to the other side where there's good habits in place, there's good behaviors in place, and then things can be better, right?
Right. I mean, we do this with our kids too, right? Like we do this with our daughter, and what I find is now obviously raising kids and being in a relationship like this, it's not exactly apples to apples. It's little apples to oranges, but to a certain extent, I'm like, wait a minute, I hold my daughter accountable, and sometimes she doesn't always is happy with me
because at the end of the day, you want to raise happy, healthy kids that
are responsible and that.
Right. And in order to do that, you have to instill certain values and certain habits in. And just like we want our kids to be the best versions of themselves, as a husband, you should want your wife to be the best possible version of herself.
Exactly. And
not to change who she is intrinsically, but to be able to say, this is what you're capable of. This is what I know you're capable of. And let's work to strive to get there. This is going to sound like a really funny analogy, but I just thought of it. When we were kids growing up, the whole Land Before Time.
Gosh. Land Before Time, 127.
Right. That was brand new when we were kids. And so the only one I've ever seen was the very first one.
I've seen the first and the third, I think.
But in that very first movie, you know, they're happy, they're together, and then something happens, and he gets separated from his family. The main character, Littlefoot,
he was my favorite.
He's like a little bronchiosaurus. Anyway,
no, he's a brontosaurus, isn't he? Or the long neck. They call him long necks.
I don't know dinosaur names. Forgive me.
It's been a while.
And what he has to do is he has to go through this journey, and he finds friends along the way. And, you know, it's a very cute little story. But in order to get to the end of the movie where they get to the Great Valley, which is like, you know,
paradise where it's green and there's sharp tooth.
Right. It's a valley. There's water. There's vegetation.
There's no enemies.
Everyone is happy. All the dinosaurs are there. His family's there. And in order to get to that, he has to go through that journey. He has to go through, you know, not having food, not having enough water, not fighting with his friends. And, you know, he has to go
fleeing the T-Rex that they call the sharp tooth.
If at any point he was just like, it's not worth it, I'm just going to give up and die. First of all, horrible children's movie. Second of all, that's never going to get him to the goal.
Right.
That's never going to get him. And so in our relationships, we have to have that consistency so that we can say, hey, it's really hard right now, but we know that by going through this hard moment, this hard transition, this hard habit building, that we're going to get to the other side of that, and we're going to be in a place where it's not a struggle anymore, that these habits are formed and everything's going to be good, and we're not going to have to focus on this forever.
You know, and you bring up a good point. That's actually a great movie to bring up with this. I mean, a lot of movies would fit into this, but since you brought it up, because there is parts in the movie where some of his friends even want to give up, and he's not even sure necessarily that he's on the right path, because he's just remembering what his mother told him, but he keeps consistently following that path, and they do eventually get there. And at the very end, he does get a little bit of that vindication that his friends are like, wow, you know, we're so glad we followed you. They don't say this in the movie, but you can tell, like, they're just like, man, we're so glad we followed him because we got there. And that's a great thing to remember, because yeah, it is not about failing along the journey. It's about staying on the journey so that you can get where you're trying to go.
And so as the dominant partner, as the husband, you have to be the leader from the standpoint of saying, you have to be the one that says, we're not giving up.
Are you calling me Littlefoot?
Yeah, to a certain extent, you would be Littlefoot, because do you remember the female character in the movie, Sarah?
Yeah.
She's the one that has a bad attitude. She wants to give up. She's like, we can't do this.
Or she's always telling Littlefoot, you don't know what you're talking about.
At one point, she's like, I don't want to listen to you. I'm going my own way.
Yeah, I'm going my own way.
And she separates from the group, and it ends up really bad for her. And sometimes as women, we can be like that, where we're fighting the process because it's uncomfortable and we don't want it. And we need our husbands to come in and say, no, we're staying this course. We are going to continue this path. We're going to continue building these habits. And this is how we're going to get there. And, you know, unlike the dynamic between Littlefoot and Sarah, because again, children's movie and they're friends, you know, she goes her own way and ends up really bad for her, and then she ends up coming back to the group very humbled.
Yeah, very humbled. That's a very big, nice character development in that movie with that character.
Right. And so, but our husbands, sometimes if we say, you know, we don't want to do that, we're going to go our own way, then the process of accountability and punishment humbles us, and we can come back very humbled and rededicated to the process of getting to that goal.
By the way, I don't know if YouTube will flag us for this, but I just want to say that Land Before Time is part of Universal. It's copyrighted by Universal. Just want to throw that out there.
Unless we're showing clips or
you never know these days, so I just want to point out, like, we're not trying to infringe on copyright there that belongs to Universal.
No, we're not showing any clips. We're not using any audio, so we should be fine.
Anyway, but again, a great analogy. That's really good. And that was one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid. So I appreciate it. Now, that's
80s kids.
I was gonna say we're 80s kids. So I can remember the Pizza Hut toy puppets even for that movie. Anyway, that's going off on another thing.
I'm not quite that old.
Well, thanks so much for that. I was happy because Littlefoot was my favorite, and when we went there the first time, I got Littlefoot. So
anyway, consistency is important for security. It's important for predictability. And it's important for the development of your relationship.
Yep. And this is the one that I have thought a lot about, even leading up to this episode, is you don't realize that you're holding your relationship back from a lot of good things. And also, just like you talked about, from the ability to get to this area where you may not even know what it looks like yet. Again, you're trying to find your way to this great valley. You don't even necessarily know, because he never knew what it looked like. He just had been told. And you're trying to get there. You're robbing yourself of that if you're not in your relationship. You're robbing yourself of something that is really good for your relationship for something that's hard in just the short period. So you're sacrificing the long term for the short term. That's what I'm trying to say.
And comfort in the short term keeps you in an uncomfortable position in the long term.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. And I'm in every area of my life, I'm getting better at that, but that's something I think we all struggle with. But remember, try to stay the course, if you will, to help your wife in those things, so that and remember the goal when it's hard, when you're in those moments where you're like, man, I did not want to enforce that. She's maybe griping about the punishment, or she doesn't want that, or she's trying to give me that sad face so I feel bad. Try to remember, okay, this is the short term, but we're trying to get here. So I'm going to ignore all that other stuff to a certain extent. And because I'm not telling you not to ignore your wife's feelings, but acknowledge them. But at the same time, hold steady and fast to those things, to those principles, to the rules and the tiers that you put in place, so that, and remember the long-term goal. And those of you men that enjoy sports, you see this all the time. The team that keeps the eye on the goal and keeps trying to improve and learn from mistakes is usually the team that comes out at the end. It's the teams that just kind of give up, or they have that short-term success, and they then get full of themselves and they don't finish the season. And the opposite is true. The team that gets down early and they don't do well, and they go through a lot of losing and they never come out of that. It's the team that's the most consistent throughout the whole year, that goes through those valleys, that comes out usually on top. And so I use that sports analogy because a lot of guys are sports fans, and you'll understand that. And just remember, the goal at the end of the year is to hoist the trophy, not to just get a couple wins, right?
So if you're struggling with consistency, just know that that is so normal. It is one of the hardest parts about having a power differential relationship, because there is that accountability that needs to be enforced.
Yeah.
But know that it's worth it, and know that that goals are obtainable. You just have to continue to work through it, and it's not going to be hard forever.
No, definitely.
Consistency can be developed over time and with practice. We are taking the summer where, we have some downtime in our schedule over the summer.
Finish school for the semester.
And so we're taking the summer to really work on consistency, work on developing that in our relationships, so that when life gets busy again, not only do we have better habits formed within our relationship, but we have consistency formed as a habit within our relationship, so that the default is consistency, and we can continue that throughout the busier times of the year for us.
Can I bring up one thing?
Sure.
This is something that, again, just came to me as we were talking about this. And the thing that I would encourage the dominants listening, the husbands listening, is I make sure you're setting goals for yourself. Because one of the things I was just thinking is, if you're setting goals and you're striving towards those, you can help her strive as well. Because, and when I mean set them and hold yourselves to a high standard, now not so high that you're beating yourself up when you're not perfect, but if you do that, I think it will be more likely that you'll be able to hold her accountable better, because you're telling yourself, look, I'm going to hold myself accountable to, and we'll use waking up early, because this is where I'm really going to be working hard, is I want to wake up earlier. I mentioned that. And so I'm going to really try to force myself to do it. If I don't do it, I'm not necessarily going to, I'm not going to quit, but I'm going to force myself to wake up early the next day if I don't quite hit it. But I am going to tell myself, hey, you didn't do it today. That's not okay. You need to, and I have this talk with myself, right? And in doing that, I think it will help you enforce the rules better for her, because you're holding yourself accountable to something. So have something that you're striving towards as well. So, because the other thing that you can bring up is say, hey, I'm not just doing this. I'm not just doing your goals. I'm doing mine. I've got my path that I'm trying to carve too. So I think that will always help if you have something for you're striving to as well.
And every day is a new day.
Yeah.
I think too many times we say, oh, we'll start next month. We'll start next week.
Right.
We'll start on Monday. We'll start at the new year.
I'm really
and that's
bad at
kind
that
of a
too.
culture that we live in, especially with like, oh, New Year's resolutions
Yeah.
or, starting fresh in the new month. Like, that's kind of a culture that we've been brought up in, but realize that every day is a brand new day.
Yes.
So if you missed the mark, or if you lacked consistency today, start tomorrow with a renewed sense of commitment to
Yes.
that goal.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Don't throw in the towel. If you mess up that day, and this goes for everybody listening, wives, husbands, if you didn't make it, take the consequence, take whatever it is you need to do, and then say, okay, tomorrow's a brand new day. We're going to start again.
And the principle of consistency really can be applied to so many different areas of life, whether it's, healthy eating, working out,
I'm trying to do that.
career aspirations, but especially when it comes to your domestic discipline relationship, you cannot expect your wife to have personal development and improvement without giving her the accountability that she needs through this dynamic. If she was capable of making these changes on her own, first off, she would have, and she wouldn't ask you for that accountability.
Right.
Or you wouldn't see the necessity to offer that accountability. And so just realize that, yes, she's an adult. Yes, she gets to have some autonomy over her own goal setting and her own work ethic.
Yeah.
However, within domestic discipline, she may be the type of person, I think most women are, where she needs a certain amount of external accountability in order to be motivated to reach those goals.
And guys, that's what your job is. That's part of being the leader, is making sure that she can reach that goal. That's part of being, and it's hard, but that's part of being the, for lack of a better term, the king. You've got to push things forward, even if it's uncomfortable. And like I said, I'm pointing two fingers at myself as I'm saying that, because that's where I need to be more consistent. So,
and again, it's not going to be hard forever. I was just thinking about like the reality TV shows of the early 2000s. Super Nanny was one that came to mind, and then The Biggest Loser. When those shows start, they start with a problem. Like Super Nanny, the kids are unruly, they're, screaming and throwing fits. And then she comes in and she teaches the parents how to offer consistent accountability and consistent consequences for that behavior. And by the end of the show, you can see the fruits of that labor, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And The Biggest Loser, they start out morbidly obese, and then with consistent eating and working out, then by the end of the show, they've lost significant weight. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to take a considerable amount of effort, especially if you're trying to break really established patterns of behavior and habits.
Those are hard. Gosh.
But by the end of it, it will get better, and you will have a better flow, and you'll develop new habits, break bad ones, and it will be so worth it, and it's not going to be hard forever.
That's right.
Because I think we're talking about like, oh, it's going to be so hard. It's going to be in the short term. Yes. Yeah. But the goal is a long, happy, healthy relationship where it's easy, and you don't get to benefit that. You don't get to experience that unless you are willing to put in the work now.
Yeah. So. Hey, well said. I'm not going to add to any of that. That's perfect. So.
All right, guys. I'm glad that you were here for this discussion. If you want to follow us on Patreon, the link for that is in the description box. If you want to email us, our email is down below as well. Follow us on Instagram, and please leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of this topic.
And lastly, I want to thank all of our new subscribers on YouTube. And we want to thank all of our Patreon supporters, and especially our new ones. But thank you all. We're so glad that you're getting something out of that. We're so glad that there have been people that have subscribed. I just, every time Aria comes to me and says, "Hey, we got a new subscriber or a new Patreon," I get so excited. It's just really cool. I'm so glad you guys are getting something out of this. And so we're going to continue to try to bring you that consistent content.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.